Thanks again, everyone, for joining today's SupplyPike Academy webinar. Today, we are going to be talking about OTIF Radar and understanding, improving, and disputing in full fines. Let's switch to the next slide. Just real quick, I'd like to introduce you to your host today. So my name is Krista Nicewarner. I am the VP of Customer Success here at SupplyPike, and I lead our customer success team, including our customer success managers, as well as our customer support team. And then with me today, I have Ryan Petty, who is our Senior Product Manager for both Deductions Navigator for Kroger and our OTIF Radar application. So Ryan will be presenting a majority of the content today and answering your questions. But Ryan, did you want to introduce yourself real quick?
Yeah. Hey, everyone. Glad you could be with us today. Hopefully we can talk about your OTIF challenges. But yeah, I have been sort of working in transportation 4 or 5 years ago and kind of moved into OTIF compliance over the last 3 to 4 years. So I've just been helping suppliers navigate these choppy OTIF waters and look forward to helping more today, hopefully.
Awesome. Thanks, Ryan. Let's go ahead and look real quick at the agenda. So we're starting off with just a quick introduction here, but we're going to be digging into some key facts for OTIF and specifically in full fines today. We'll also dive in and take a look specifically at OTIF Radar and a demo of the application and give you some pointers there. And then we'll have time towards the end of today's presentation for some Q&A and discussion as well. This next slide is just a couple housekeeping items, just as some reminders. Following the conclusion of today's webinar, within the next 3 to 4 business days, we'll be sending out a copy of this slide deck as well as a recording of the webinar today. And then as far as asking questions during the webinar today, you should see a box at the bottom of your Zoom window labeled Q&A. If you pull up that box, you'll be able to submit questions. If you have a question as we're talking throughout the presentation today, go ahead and type in your question at any point. We'll be able to answer questions periodically throughout today's webinar, as well as I mentioned, we'll have that dedicated time towards the end to answer your questions as well. But again, that's the Q&A box just towards the bottom of your Zoom window. All right, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Ryan, who's going to dive into improving your in-full performance.
Yeah, thanks, Krista. Slide sort of talks for itself. We did want to just give you just a quick reminder. I know we lead off a lot of our webinars with this type of information, but just want to set the stage here. So when we're talking today about OTIF fines, but Walmart loves to charge you every single way they possibly can. And so some common forms of sort of chargebacks and deductions. So number one on the left, you have deductions, AP deductions, and they're actually kind of related to today's topic. A common deduction type is a shortage deduction, like a code 22, 24, 25, if you're familiar with those deduction codes. So those are separate from OTIF charges, and they come from kind of 2 different processes. So Walmart could, basically withhold payment for goods that they feel they did not receive. That would be an AP deduction. But then on that same PO, you can also get a not in full fine from OTIF. So 2 different types of charges. SQEP is Walmart's new compliance program, and it is also independent of these other sort of charge sources. So the main sort of takeaway from this is that these are all independent charge types. You can dispute, them in various ways, but even if you dispute one charge on a PO, if you had, say, an AP shortage deduction and you dispute that, that's not going to necessarily wipe away the OTIF charge. So you could still have an outstanding OTIF charge for that same PO, even if you successfully fought the AP deduction. So that's kind of the key here, is just these are all different charge types and they're all pretty independent of each other, and they can stack up on you even on the same orders. But today we're going to be talking about OTIF fines specifically. So another key kind of data point, I'm sure we all know Walmart's OTIF goals are 98% for every single metric, including in full. So that means that out of all of the cases that Walmart has ordered for, say, a month, they expect you to fill at least 98% of them. So a little bit harder than I remember grade school measurements going with, but yeah, their goals are 98%. Anything below that, you face a likely fine. So digging into kind of some root causes of in-full challenges, we kind of just want to start with like the groundwork or the definition. There's only one OTIF accountability issue for in full, and that is just called not in full. For on time or collect ready, there's actually multiple compliance issues that you can face, but with in full, any failure is basically just not in full. So pretty straightforward there. And then the definition, which again, I'm sure we all know, is basically, cases that Walmart ordered that they did not receive. That's their definition of cases that are marked as not in full. So with that, some data points that are just generally helpful, things to consider when you're looking at in full issues. And this is kind of at a PO level, but of course you may want to roll this data up. But some factors to consider, obviously how many cases were ordered, how much was not received, the department. If you're a supplier that fulfills multiple departments, then you may want to break it down kind of by which department. Obviously item as well, if there's particular items that are having not in full issues. Cancellation data is very important, and we'll talk about why here shortly. The ship point is another data sort of point or perspective that you may want to understand, especially and primarily if you're a supplier with multiple warehouse or shipping locations. If you ship from multiple facilities, understanding kind of performance from each of those can be very helpful. So it's helpful to know for each PO, which facility did it ship from. Other things that might be relevant depending on your sort of business with Walmart, how you order, how you replenish. Really out of those, I would say PO type can be very important to understand. Was this like a manual, say SSO order, or was this a replenishment order that came from Walmart? Event codes can also help, identify like promos or things like that may have been sort of a contributing factor to any not in full order. So those are just some of the sort of common data points that we see as generally helpful. And we're going to dive into our application here, SupplyPike, to show you how you can look at this data here shortly. But these slides, we just kind of want to cover some fundamentals, and then we'll dive into the app. So kind of the last section of these slides is primarily about sort of some common root causes of being not in full. This is certainly not the entire list. There's a lot of potential sort of causes of being not in full, but we'll dive into some of these common ones and definitely open to talking about any of them that you may be experiencing. So with that, starting out, cases misreceived by Walmart. So this is a kind of invalid fine for in full from our perspective, from SupplyPike's perspective. So what this means generally is cases where you shipped them out of your facility but Walmart says they didn't get it. And this is a common scenario across a lot of suppliers. It's very common for us to see this, but I will say that if you think about like all the cases that failed in full as kind of a pie, this is usually a small piece of the pie. So it does happen commonly, but it's usually not the majority of the problem. But we want to highlight it here as something that is relevant to look at. So this is hard to prevent and mitigate because, Walmart has their own receiving process. And if you are shipping in full and Walmart is incorrectly receiving those goods, that's hard for you to fix yourself. But some suppliers have maybe greater problem with this. And if you do have that sort of more significant problem, you might consider some of these things. Suppliers have gotten creative with packaging in terms of, different colors or different labels, like literally animal stickers or other sort of stickers that stand out that would differentiate one item versus another item. So that's kind of the goal, or a common problem is Walmart is receiving these pallets in and they're miscounting. A lot of times item A, they're counting it as item B. And so you may end up as over on item B and short on item A because they're miscounting these items. So anything you can do to make it easier to identify which case relates to which item can help kind of prevent that manual human error in that unloading and receiving process. I know that's sometimes expensive to do in your operation, so it's not necessarily an easy fix, but if this problem is consistently happening, it's at least worth considering. How can you, reduce this issue? So something to consider if this is a big problem for you, and we'll talk about how you can spot it in your data in SupplyPike if it is. And one other call out in terms of, you may want to have access to shipping documents for potential disputing if this is a issue, because obviously if you ship the goods, Walmart didn't receive it, ideally you could dispute that and recover those invalid fines. Walmart has sort of been a little bit hard to dispute with shipping documents for whatever reason. They will happily accept them all the time on AP deduction disputes. But when it comes to OTIF, they say that that kind of documentation is not necessarily proof for them to reverse the charges. So it's kind of nice to have in your back pocket and provide that. But I would say based on our experience so far, it doesn't seem to be sort of a end all be all solution.
Ryan, real quick, a question on that. Does Walmart use scanning to process their receiving, or how do they misreceive when cartons are labeled with EDI or ASN labels?
Yeah, that's a great question. So they are absolutely moving to more automated DCs where they have those like scanners that scan multiple sides of each box that's pulled in. So in theory, that should reduce those types of errors. But I will say that they have been in process and talking about adding that kind of automated receiving for years at their DCs. We have seen some specific DCs add that automation. And then there's a lot of DCs that do not have those, that set of equipment. So it's kind of hit and miss at this point, to where, there's still a fair bit of manual counting happening at the DCs. But hopefully in the long run, they, actually fulfill that sort of promise and plan of having more automated receiving, and these kinds of errors go down over time. But it is still common for us to see this. Good question. All right. So again, this scenario is typically a small piece of the pie. It's not the biggest. And when we are talking about trying to reduce in full fines over time, disputing is one, strategy to do that, is to try to recover these invalid fines. But because this tends to be a smaller piece of the pie, you're not going to have as big of an impact as you can potentially have with prevention and mitigation of in-full issues. Basically, trying to improve your actual score over time so that you just reduce the amount of the fine that you're receiving over time. So, definitely we want to help you go after past invalid fines. But in terms of the biggest impact that you can make, improving your score and reducing valid fines is usually the biggest opportunity. So with that, these next two kind of root causes talk more about sort of, valid fines and how you can potentially identify, and then we'll talk about how to hopefully reduce them. So lack of product. Core supply chain has been upside down for a couple of years now, and somewhat is maybe getting back on track, but for some suppliers, not necessarily. And in the midst of that, Walmart increased their OTIF goals from 95 to 98% for in full. So it got even harder. So obviously, this is a tough problem to solve, lack of product. So some things to consider: number one, this sort of blue box at the bottom of this slide, how to spot. A lot of suppliers are pretty aware if you're not able to fill particular items. So, usually you have some knowledge of this, but it is always great to confirm that with data. So what I would kind of look at is, looking at not in full POs where, number one, a cancellation reason code was supplied of supplier does not have product. It's kind of a obvious identifier of this scenario. Another one is looking if there's not a reason code or a cancellation. If you look at that ASN shipped amount and you see that, Walmart ordered 100 cases, but you only shipped 50 and there was no cancellation done, then, usually it's because you simply didn't have the product to fill that order, and would likely be an indicator that this was kind of the issue. So anyways, this is usually more obvious if it's the reason, but there are some ways to kind of look in your data to try to spot and identify if this is a cause. So things to look at to try to improve this. Number one, again, if you have multiple facilities that you're fulfilling orders out of, it can be helpful to understand what is the in-full performance from each facility, and even which items are they struggling to fill out of that particular facility. And it may be that there's sort of that nuanced issue that you can take this big in full fine and understand that, okay, this one facility out of 3 of them is making up, 50% of my fines. And from this facility, it's these 5 items that are driving 80% of their issues. So that's one thing you can do, is just gain clear visibility into where the source of the fines are coming from. In addition, obviously review Walmart's forecast. We know Walmart is no oracle and their forecasts are not perfect. So, obviously you may be doing this. You still may struggle with in full because Walmart may order greatly above forecast, but it's at least something to be aware of, is what they're forecasting to order or to sell in their stores, so that you can try to have, at least do your part on the front side and try to have what they think they're going to order. And obviously you may have production issues, raw material shortages that could be challenging. And, that's going to potentially get into other areas of your organization that may be harder to impact. But that's really where, identifying the source of the fines and sort of the majority of the fines, whether it's particular items or specific facilities that don't have enough product in stock to fill orders. At least if you can make that visible to other teams, then you can potentially drive action, especially when you can show what was the fine amounts associated with these items. That's always a helpful sort of leveraging tactic to show, this is how big the pain is, how much we're losing related to this. Last thing on this sort of root cause document. So not using the best cancel reason, and this can kind of tie back to the last slide as well, but this is kind of an important fundamental concept. A lot of suppliers know this, some suppliers don't when we talk to them. So just want to make sure it's 100% clear. When you do not have enough product to fill an order, or you do not plan to fill an order, Walmart wants you to cancel, and you can go through that cancellation process and tell them you're not going to fill this entire order, or you're not going to fill these specific items on the order to cancel, but that does not necessarily absolve you of OTIF accountability. You can still get fined for those canceled cases, even if you go through that cancel process. So it all depends on the reason code that is picked when you cancel. There's a list of reason codes you can use when you're canceling, and each reason code has an owner. I'll go ahead and skip to the next slide, and you can see this list here. So on the left side, you kind of see the list of reason codes that you would be picking. There's a short description on this table here of kind of what that reason code means. And then lastly, the important column, the one on the far right, is who owns the accountability for that reason code. So you see it's either broken down to either supplier or Walmart. If it's a supplier reason code, then you will own the accountability for those canceled cases, and you'll potentially be fined for all of those canceled cases. Even though you went through the process of telling Walmart you're not going to ship it, we still fine you an OTIF. If it's a Walmart accountability, then you do not get fined, and everybody's happy, no fine at all, your score improves, and you don't own the accountability for those canceled cases. So it's definitely very important to know this list. One aspect that is important to know is when you cancel, in Nova is usually the app that you're doing these cancellations. If you choose a supplier cancel reason code, those are like auto approved. Immediately Walmart accepts that cancellation and it's applied. If you choose a cancel reason code with Walmart as the owner, then it will be sort of pending a review by Walmart. Usually it's a replenishment manager or someone kind of from that team reviewing those cancel reasons, and they can deny it. So you could choose a Walmart reason code, they could deny it, and you could still end up being fined for those canceled cases. But obviously they could approve it as well. And if they approve it, then you completely avoid accountability. So kind of my rule of thumb on this is, have this list handy, understand what the reason codes are that you can pick with Walmart accountability. And if you're going to cancel, if there's any reason you can justify sort of putting the blame on Walmart, we talked about if they order way above forecast, if an item is being end of lifed, or, a seasonal and they're beyond that season, if anything at all, if they sort of, are low on product and they're asking you to ship everything possible and ordering in high quantities that you can't fill, anything like that, if you can justify using Walmart, then go ahead and try it. And the worst case is they'll deny it, and you still get the fine, but you'll never avoid the fine if you don't try to use a Walmart reason code ever. So definitely want to make sure that's crystal clear sort of in the cancellation process and who owns accountability for that. All right. So I think with that, let's take a look at SupplyPike OTIF Radar and kind of this demo company that we have. Just want to hit some of the areas that are important to look at in SupplyPike for identifying sort of sources of info issues, but also, thinking about what you can do to improve them. So number one, we're here on the dashboard. I'm sure everyone has seen sort of the scores and finds over time. These colors associate to the info metric. And you may have actually multiple info metrics if you ship to different departments. They have like different categories basically, and each category is separate. Here we just have food info, but you might have food info and consumables info. And those would be scored separately and fined separately as well. So just something to know. But I would start by looking at, what has my info score been recently and how am I trending? What have my info fines been recently to understand, what is the size of this problem that you're having? And you can export this data out, by the way, if you wanted to say, show me info fines year to date, you can export that out and quickly kind of calculate that year to date fine for info. So that's just a high level, be able to understand, do you have an info problem? And if so, how large is it? The second part of the dashboard that you may want to look at is for a particular time period, you can see a breakdown. Right now, I've got September selected. You can see your specific info score, the exact amount of cases that were delivered versus how much was ordered, the total fine for this month. And then we also highlight invalid fines here. And in this case, I talked earlier about that Walmart misreceiving, but that's what we're highlighting here is cases that were shipped, but not received according to Walmart data. So you shipped it according to your ASN data. Walmart says they did not receive it. So just high level sort of visibility into that info performance for a particular time period right here on the dashboard. If you wanted, you could click on either of these amounts and it would take you to all of the orders that make up this fine amount. But before we look at the orders, I want to show a couple of kind of root cause analysis that you can do to see, where are the majority of my fines coming from? And so in SupplyPike, what I would do is go to this analysis tab. And this is where we break down your OTIF data from all of these different perspectives. So for info specifically, there's probably ones here that are more, helpful than others. So the areas that I would really focus on is origins, departments, again, especially if you have multiple ship points, if you have multiple departments that you're filling orders for, and then of course items as well, where you can break down performance from an item perspective. And custom segments is something that's relatively new with OTIF Radar, so I'll talk about that too briefly. But let's start with this concept. We talked about if you have multiple warehouses that you fill orders out of, how can you assess the performance of each of your warehouses? So if you are collect, all you have to do is click on origins and we would load your collect ship points and show you a list of your ship points and the performance and fines associated with each ship point. I happen to be in a prepaid demo company today, so we don't have any there, but if you're prepaid, I want to show how sort of quickly you can create those same ship point analysis if you're prepaid. So what I would do is click on custom segments from this analysis page. And then I've already added a couple of warehouses, but I'll show you how quick and easy it is to do it. So you would just click on add segment, and let's say you have a facility in Dallas. So you can name this facility whatever you like to identify it for your needs. So you can name it. And then the idea is that we're out of all your OTIF data, we're going to filter it down to just orders that came out of your Dallas warehouse. So typically, if you were a prepaid supplier, you have certain warehouses that fill certain Walmart DCs. So you can click on destination, and then basically you can select the DCs that this warehouse fills orders for. And I know this is a little bit of work, but you only have to do this one time, and then it's saved for good, and you have that facility defined and saved. So that's all it takes to just kind of select the DCs that this warehouse fills. And then we would click on create. And I'll do that here in a second. But just one other call out, if your business happens to have multiple 9-digit vendors, and maybe your Dallas warehouse is associated with a specific 9-digit vendor, you could also, instead of clicking on and filtering by destination, you could also click on 9-digit vendor filter and just select the 9-digit vendor number that's associated with this warehouse. So either way, whether you're filtering by DC that you're shipping to or by 9-digit, either way, you can kind of filter the data to just get these Dallas warehouse POs. And so once you do that, you just click create, and then it will be added to this list here. I may have chose some POs that some DCs that didn't have any POs for this time period, but what it would do is show up in this list with our Atlanta and Scranton warehouse, and we can quickly see the in full score, the associated fine amount, and how many cases kind of were ordered and delivered from these individual DCs, from your own DCs. So whether it's custom segments or the origins page, you basically have this list of warehouses that you can review and assess performance from each location. And then what you can do is further dive in. So I could click on my Dallas warehouse segment and see performance over time from this location. I could also quantify how much of my fines have come from this one location over time. And even more, I could break down this location's performance, say, by item. So I could actually see the in full score by item at this warehouse and try to understand, are there certain items from this location that they're not able to fill, that they're struggling with the most? So this is essentially a scorecard, so you can assess specifically how each of your warehouses are doing, and really specifically understand, are there certain warehouses that are really driving the majority of your fines for either metric. So that's the point here of origins or warehouse analysis. So you can quickly compare performance from each one and then break down performance at that location. And a lot of our suppliers will kind of use this data to share visibility to their warehouse teams, so they understand, how much they are contributing to in fines and where the problems are coming from. So I know that was a lot, but that is kind of an important concept here for warehouse analysis, scorecarding. Just a note, you can also see the POs that sort of came out of this location. So if you wanted to just send them a PO report, then you can just export all the POs that came from that location. So that is one export option. You also have options to just kind of export the whole scorecard as a PDF. You can export their trending report, like their scores and fines over time. So ways to make this information visible to other teams so that they understand, sort of where these fines are coming from. So origins analysis and scorecards is an area that you may want to look at. I kind of talked about, if you have multiple departments you're filling orders for, same concept here. So you would click on departments and you could very quickly break down how much of your overall in full fines are coming from certain departments. Maybe one department is great at 99% and another one is lagging much further behind at 50%. So this analysis page would give you access to kind of that department level score and fine information. Just like we did on the warehouses, you could also click on a department and pull up its OTIF scorecard to see, how is this department trending over time, and do that same type of breakdown. You could see the items for a specific department and where the majority of fines are happening for that department. So last thing on this analysis is the items that I would definitely, obviously state if you're having in full problems. A lot of suppliers have specific items that you're struggling with more so than others. And you probably have an idea of that already, but it's always great to compare the data and just confirm those suspicions. So this items analysis would let you very quickly understand what are your fill rates per item, see the actual cases that were ordered and delivered or not delivered. And then the really important part is how much of the fine is coming from that particular item. And sometimes what we see is like, well, this item is actually at a higher fill rate, say, than these three, but the fine amount is much larger. And that's because the volume is much higher in this scenario. But OTIF fines, the way they work, because they're 3% of the price of each item, you could have some expensive goods that you have a really high fill rate on, but because they're expensive, any failure is sort of really expensive as well. So this would clearly let you see, how much of your overall fine is coming from each item. And if you can focus any effort or resources to solving particular items' problems, you obviously want to start with the big fish, the ones that are driving the majority of your fines. So this items analysis would let you, kind of very quickly do that. You can export all of these tables here with the download. Just like those other areas, you could dive into a particular item to understand, if you're having sort of fill rate issues over time with this item, see how much in fines it's contributed over time, same type of analysis that you can do everywhere else. So I know this is all visibility and you're probably like, okay, well, what do I do with this information? So I think the key step that we're trying to identify here is to make sure that what's driving the majority of your fines. Because if you don't know where the problem is, obviously you don't necessarily know what you can do to solve or prevent that problem. So that's the reason why we cover kind of all this visibility, is to make sure it's crystal clear that where the majority of your fines are coming from, so you know where to focus your time and effort. So that is a major sort of goal of this analysis area and how you can use it. So we'll switch gears here and dive into individual orders, and then we'll talk about some processes as well that you may want to evaluate to actually improve performance. So what I did is click on orders, and then I switched over to this in full metric. And so this allows us to see, I'm filtered to the month of September here, by the way. So this allows me to see the, total sort of in full fine for this month. And then all of the POs that were non-compliant for this metric for in full. And you've got a lot of data here in this order list. You've got obviously the PO numbers, the actual fine total related to these orders, and then a lot of these sort of quantity columns. So starting with how many cases did Walmart order, how much was not in full or non-compliant, and then We also bring in your ASN shipped amount. So talked about earlier about those discrepancies between what you shipped versus what Walmart received. Well, that's what you could very quickly compare with these two columns here, your ASN shipped amount on this PO versus how much Walmart says they received on this PO. There is actually one more kind of quantity column here called that we bring in for you called DSS, cases received. DSS is just another app in Retail Link. And the reason we pull in this data is because DSS also shows cases received. And sometimes DSS will report more cases received than what OTIF does. And that is another potential reason to dispute charges. So that's why we bring it in, because if DSS is showing Walmart received more goods than what OTIF says, and you were fined for that, it's kind of a good reason to dispute. So anyways, just want to kind of cover all these quantity columns that are kind of relevant to looking at these individual orders. You also may want to look at cancel information. We talked about how important that process is. So you can see for any past time periods, are these orders being canceled? And if so, what reason code was picked? And in this case, we can see a couple of these orders where supplier doesn't have product. And that is where it's going to land all of the accountability on you as a supplier. So we can see that, these orders were canceled in full with supplier doesn't have product. And that resulted in, the entire order receiving a fine, essentially. So if this was a Walmart cancel reason code, then it wouldn't even show up in this list. You would not have any non-compliance. There would be no fine amount, and your score would be higher. So cancellation data is definitely, I would say, valuable to look at in your data set to understand, number one, are you canceling these orders? And two, or these lines, even if it's specific items. And two, what reason code is being picked? And this is where applying that kind of process change to how you cancel and using those Walmart reason codes whenever possible. This is, definitely one of the things you have to sort of, you're equipped with to try to drive OTIF improvements. So, first step is identifying, are you canceling? What reason are you picking? And then can we modify our cancel process to try to point the blame at Walmart when possible? So definitely an important data point to look at in your data set. Some others, just for kind of, again, root cause analysis to understand the problem. You may want to look at event codes or whether this is a manual order. If you as a supplier are writing a lot of SSOs, then you may spot, I'm having infill issues mostly on SSOs or manual orders. Or these could be like this scenario where it's all replenishment orders coming from Walmart. But it's helpful to know that for sure. So these data points are there to understand, are you having problems with manual orders, or is it all the replenishment orders? And your processes to, address that may be different. One quick note while we're on sort of these manual orders, just a little note for OTIF rules. If you have a manual order or an SSO that you generated, you can modify the order quantity. You can adjust that order quantity in Nova. And if it's a manual order, then Walmart will basically accept your adjusted order quantity, and they'll only grade your OTIF performance off the adjusted order quantity. If it's a replenishment order, a sort of, Walmart created order, like these are here, then they'll always grade you based on the original order quantity. So even though they allow you to adjust the order quantity on a replenishment order, you're still graded for OTIF purposes based on the original order quantity. So just a quick note there. They love to have their OTIF rules and nuances. So that is one nuance. If it's manual, you can adjust the order quantity and they'll accept that. So by all means, if you are unable to fill a manual order that maybe you wrote last week or a couple of weeks ago, then adjust the order quantity down and that will eliminate the in full fine. If it's a replenishment system order, you can't use that process to sort of avoid the fine. But if it's manual, you can, and you can reduce your in full fine through that. So yeah, more data is available on this orders list. You can break it down to department, to certain vendor number. The PO type is also in here. So a lot of data is available with this, but depending on, your business and what you're doing, certain ones may be more important, but those are some of the ones that I would call out as really helpful to look at when you're trying to assess, what changes need to be made to improve in full. You can export this whole list out. So if you need to do some kind of custom filtering, multi-column filtering type scenario, you can export it out here to export this list. So I think that kind of covers a lot of the, root cause and mitigation that we wanted to cover today. Still want to talk about disputing and submitting that from SupplyPike, but before I do, just wanted to check, Krista, if there's anything that came up so far.
Yeah, no questions so far, but just a reminder to everyone on the webinar, if you have any questions on this section, just click that Q&A box at the bottom of the Zoom window and you can type in your question there.
Awesome. All right. Well, hopefully that means I'm answering all your questions.
You're doing great.
Yeah, if not, please send them our way. Last thing we wanted to talk about today was disputing in full fines. And I talked about, our dashboard page kind of calls out invalid fine amount for whatever particular month you're looking at. So one thing to know is that Walmart changed their disputing process around 6 months ago, and they now instruct you to dispute through high radius. And one sort of, limitation or really the way to dispute with high radius is you can only dispute there after the fine has been posted. So if you see a month where it shows sort of actual fines, that means Walmart's posted the fines for that month. Versus, say, if we looked at October, that's still projected. Walmart does not project to invoice October until November 28th. So that's not available yet for us to dispute. So just a sort of simple little sort of bookkeeping note for disputing. You can dispute up to 13 months ago, all the way up until last month that was invoiced. So that's kind of the dispute window. And then the main reason I went back to the dashboard is, again, to just remind you that we automatically calculate what we think are invalid fines for any particular month based on data. And that's highlighted here. So you can just click on this amount for a month and it will automatically take you to the orders that make up that invalid fine on this orders page. And you can see this filter here is in blue. And the reason is because it's applied right now. So basically we've applied this invalid filter and there's 16 POs that we found. And I can show you some specific kind of examples. So we talked about, if you ship more cases than Walmart says they received, we identify that discrepancy and label that as a possibly invalid fine. And really, if you think about it, In this scenario, either the ASN information is wrong and you didn't actually ship this many goods, or Walmart's receiving information is wrong and they, miscounted the goods. So it's generally one or the other. We identify the discrepancy, and it doesn't hurt to dispute it. If you're not sure, you can at least try. And it's very possible Walmart is wrong, and hopefully they would approve that dispute. It is, of course, possible as well that the ASN information is wrong and they would deny it, but you don't know until you try. So these discrepancies are just automatically identified for you. To dispute it, all you would have to do, we've already filtered down to the POs. So all you have to do is hit this checkbox to select all the POs, click on dispute, and then we autofill this high radius dispute window with the dispute amount. We autofill in the sort of reason you're disputing, and then even autofill a description for sort of a suggested description for this dispute attempt. And this is just based on our invalid find that we've identified. In this case, it says these items were shipped, but we're still charged for in full. And then most importantly, we automatically create an Excel supporting document for this dispute. And this is created in the format that High Radius wants it to be. They want certain columns to be included. So we have, tried to match their requirements. You can download it and preview the file ahead of time if you like. If you really want to, you can make adjustments and even upload your adjusted file as well. And then lastly, you can submit it. And that's all it takes to submit that in full dispute. One other thing I wanted to show is, you can, so we identified, so in this scenario, we disputed all the ASN discrepancies. We could also dispute the DSS discrepancies. So it talks about, Walmart has multiple retail link apps. Sometimes the data is different in those apps. Well, we can also spot differences in the DSS cases received and the OTIF cases received. And in this case, we've actually seen a little bit higher approval on these disputes. If you think about it, it's maybe a little bit easier argument to make, like Walmart, your own other system is saying you received the goods, but I'm still being charged an OTIF for it. And, for whatever reason, we've had a little bit higher approval rate with this type of dispute. So it may be something to consider. That said, usually this discrepancy scenario is smaller than the ASN discrepancy scenario. So it's kind of a, pros and cons. You can either go after the big one first and see if they approve it. And one nice thing about this OTIF disputing is if they deny the first dispute, you can then submit a whole new dispute on this month. So this is not a one dispute limit. You have multiple disputes you could submit. So if you really wanted to, you could dispute the ASN discrepancies first. If they reject that, then you could come back and select the DSS discrepancies. And so all you do is click on DSS discrepancies, check the filter box, and then it would automatically filter down to all POs where there's a difference in DSS and OTIF. In this demo company, there were not any POs where the DSS received amount was greater than OTIF, but that's what that would basically represent, is we'd filter down all the POs where that condition applies. And then all you'd have to do is just like the ASN discrepancies, you'd select all those POs, click on dispute. We actually change the suggested dispute message to represent sort of that DSS difference instead of the ASN difference. And that Excel file is modified as well. So it highlights the DSS difference in the supporting documentation of that Excel file. So you can easily dispute either scenario. You can also track your disputes. You can track it here at the top of the page, or you can go to your disputes tab and see past disputes that were submitted and see, kind of what metric was disputed, how much was disputed, whether it was approved or denied, and kind of what those amounts were. So you can dig into an individual dispute, pull up the comments that Walmart may have issued in response to the dispute, all that kind of information there. All right, so hopefully, that covers, how you can dispute with SupplyPike. We are just on September, but just as a reminder, you could, quickly filter and sort of switch back to previous months. When you are disputing OTIF charges, they want you to dispute 1 month at a time. So you would dispute September, and then separately you could go back to August and then follow the same process to dispute August. So I think, Krista, that covers the demo portion. And yeah.
Great. Thanks so much, Ryan. That was really comprehensive. So yeah, we'll leave a few minutes open here. We've got about 3 minutes left on the clock. So if anyone has any questions, Ryan and I will hang out here to make sure and answer those questions for you all. Otherwise, thank you so much for attending today. We really appreciate you. If you think of any questions after today, please feel free to reach out to either Ryan or I, or also at our SupplyPike support team, which is support@supplypike.com. Also, another little handy tip is we have live chat built right into the SupplyPike application. So if you're working through your day and you have a question that pops to your mind, in the bottom right-hand corner, you will see a chat bubble that you can click on and send us a message right there. And our support team monitors those and we'll get you a quick response. All right, thanks everyone. Again, Ryan and I will hang out, but otherwise, if you have any questions, you can leave them there. Otherwise, have a great afternoon.